and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Next on our agenda, we have business and finance. Number one, discussion and possible action on approval of annual financial audit for fiscal year ending August 31st, 2019. Mr. Superintendent?
Miss Watts, she's checking if anybody wants this. It's blank, okay.
Ms. Watts, board members, it's our pleasure to report that we are able actually to complete our financial audit before time, really early, so everyone can really enjoy that Christmas break. So very excited about that. With us tonight to share the funding of our auditor, our external auditor, is Mr. Carlos Casos, and then Miss also here, Ms. Cancino, so they can help us go through their financial funding. Mr. Carlos.
Madam President, members of the board, superintendent, my name is Carlos Cascos, and I'm with Cascos and Associates, and we are independent auditors. Before you have the audit report, looks like this. Okay. And it's pretty lengthy, and I am not going to go over the whole audit. We'd be here all night, but it's going to be a premature Christmas present to the administration of the board. Our findings were very, very good. First, let me compliment you and the administration for earning an unmodified opinion on your financial statements. An unmodified opinion is the best opinion that one can give to any entity. A CPA firm can give to any entity, whether it's private, public, political, nonprofit, schools, counties, etc. I commend you on that. Not everyone earns unmodified opinions. As a matter of fact, if any district, you all may know this already, but if a district receives a modified opinion, it's an automatic F on their grading. So we're good with that. I think some of the highlights I'd like to commend you. First of all, is your fund balance. You have about a $50 million unassigned unreserved fund balance. If you want to know what that equates to in terms of days of operations, it's 127 days. Now, there is no litmus test that TA will tell you shall have, or you should have, or you must have, but anything over 60 to 75 days is considered healthy. You are very healthy when it comes to your financial position. If anyone's wondering what it costs this district to operate on a daily basis, it's a little under $400,000 a day. That's how much it costs to open up your doors every day, to pay everybody, you know, to basically run your school district, $400,000 a day. Now, if you'd like to go to page 66, I do want to highlight a couple of things there. The page 66 is a schedule that outlines your budget to actual. We all know that it's very, very difficult and challenging to predict what our revenue stream is going to be when you're adopting the budget. Well, y'all did an excellent job in not only budgeting your revenues, but exceeding the revenues that you budgeted by $645,000. You did even better than that on your expenditure side. You ended up spending $17 million less than what you budgeted during the fiscal year. That allowed for your fund balance to increase to the $50 million. The $50 million that's unassigned and is not meant to provide operating expenses. It's not meant to provide raises for employees and spend on ongoing expenditures. The fund balance is for that. It's a rainy day fund. For those of y'all that know anyone that experienced some of the impact of Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Ike and then Hurricane Dolly in 2008, that rainy day fund is critical. We live in an area that is subject, as we all know, to flooding. Just because we're 60, 70 miles from the coast, many times our communities in Hidalgo County are impacted worse than those in Cameron, especially when it comes to flooding. So it's so important to have that rainy day fund that's readily accessible We were speaking earlier, and we all know people that, in districts that are in the storm area of a Hurricane Harvey hit, and had it not been for some of their fund balances, they would have been in dire straits. They may have probably had to go out and borrow more money than what they're able to. So really, that concludes my presentation. I'm very happy to report to you that this financial report is fairly stated, and again, Donna is in good financial shape. I do want to take the opportunity not only to thank the members of the board and the superintendent and Ms. Cancino and her staff. We're working late last night trying to get the last bit of the management letter ready, which is another document behind the financial report that highlights really what we found during our testing. And testing is what we do that generates management comments. And what we do is we randomly select transactions. We can't possibly audit every single transaction, but we do randomly select transactions, whether it's in payroll, whether it's in just on your expenditures, and we test those transactions to make sure that they comply with not only your policies, but the laws and regulations of the state. There was a couple of items that we found regarding I-9s that are outlined there. Management's already addressed those, but we did not find anything else related to our testing that requires us to report that to you. So really, that's the extent of my presentation. I promised I'd keep it somewhat short, concise, and I'm available for questions if anybody should have any at this time.
Projected A rating, definitely, right?
On the indicators that are data-driven, we should be getting all full 10 points on all of them.
Perfect.
We're gonna get another 100.
All I can say is on the ones that award points, we should be getting all 10 points.
That's a prediction, but obviously, TEA, sometimes the active.
Well, that's what we got last year, so we can't go any higher than that.
We don't want to go lower either.
No. So I did run in the numbers yesterday, the way TA calculates these, so we should be getting all the points. Our administrative cost ratio was the one where we had missed a couple of points here and there on previous years. We actually lowered, as you can see by the budget decreasing, we lowered to, last year we had it at 7.07, this year it's at 0.67. So we went a little lower, so we'll get all full points. So long as you're below 0.8, you get the 10 points. So we're well below it.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Y'all have a Merry Christmas. All right?
Likewise, likewise.
Thank you very much.
Is there a motion? Move. Motion made by Mr. De Los Rios,
A second?
second by Dr. Valdez. Sir, how do you vote, Mr. Rivera?
Favor?
Favor.
I also vote in favor, and motion passes. Number 3, Human Resources, discussion of possible action to award RFP number 111919-499, chronic disease management for diabetics and related medical supplies. Mr. Superintendent and Dr. Salvador.
Ms. Watts, board members, first before I move, and I know we've moved to another item, but I want to just again thank again our Ms. Cancino and her team for really working really hard to make sure that we keep up the good work, and we have that 100 we want to keep, right? So I want to thank them really again for everything that they do.
Standing ovation.
Okay, as far as the next item, we have with us Mr. Lo Arias, who's our consultant from Gallagher, and he has a few things that he want to share with us about this particular proposal.
Sure. Good evening, distinguished members of the board, President, Superintendent. My name is Lou Arias. I'm with Gallagher Benefit Services, and I represent Donna ISD as your account executive on the medical program that you have. I believe you have in front of you a 2-page presentation. You might be aware that the diabetic medical supplies are carved out of your medical program, meaning that it does not run through your PBM or your medical TPA, in this case being Blue Cross and ESI. It had been carved out, and a local DME company, Miracle Medical, had been awarded that contract for, I guess, several years, and that contract had expired. We put it out to bid just recently to make sure that we continue to look for the best cost for these supplies and offer it to your members or employees at little or no cost, especially for diabetes. So what I wanted to do is go over the results of that RFP or the RFP itself. So if you would go ahead and flip to the first page. The RFP was released on November 26th. The response due date was December 16th, which was just this past Monday.
What is those 2 pages? I don't have those.
I don't have them either.
Are they on the,
They're on the,
on
oh, the ones on here on the screen? Got it.
Okay, continue. We had one respondent, which was Miracle Medical, who is the incumbent, and in the line of coverage is diabetic supplies. Now, keep in mind, these are the supplies only. This does not include the insulin or any medications. These are the supplies.
Sir, does this company, like, our employees who are diabetic, if they get on the list, they automatically get renewal on their,
Yes, so, guess we can start there a little.
yeah.
Good evening. So the way that the program works is if an employee, or really a dependent, if they're covered on the plan, if they get a prescription from their doctor that they need to be checking their sugar once, twice a week, once, twice a day, 3 times, it all depends on how they need to manage it, then they would take that prescription, either bring it to us and we fax it over, somehow get it to Miracle Medical, and automatically they get on their rotation to get the supplies delivered. But it's based off of what the doctor prescribes. It's not just a matter of they just take whatever number of boxes they want to take out to the individual. So it's based off of a prescription from the
Yeah.
doctor.
So they'll be receiving the little machine and the little
The
strips and
machine,
the
the
little.
strips, if they are on an insulin that requires a syringe, they also get the syringe delivered. Because that's not part of the medication when they go fill it at the pharmacy, that's actually paid separate. So it's part of the supplies that we have with the management company.
this is the same one we've had for quite some
We
time.
have, So that's why sometimes on your accounts payable, you'll see an actual invoice and it'll say like syringes, and I know at one point there was a concern of like, whoa, like what are we doing paying for syringes? But that's where that billing comes from, and that's what it's.
And these are pretty, we did an analysis to make sure that these are pretty competitive with
The
the market.
pricing?
On the pricing, yes, sir.
Why
and
don't
so-
we go through the whole process before we start asking questions? That way we can ask at the very end.
Sure.
Let's let you cover
Okay.
your items first before we continue asking questions.
Okay, so again, as Mr. Del Rios had mentioned, the primary provider for these diabetic supplies are strictly your supplies. And so under the summary, I've listed the glucose diagnostic meters, those are your glucometers, the test strips, the lancets, the pen tips, the alcohol swabs, and the syringes themselves. Again, none of the medication is distributed through Miracle Medical. They use their PBM, which is ESI, to get their insulin or any other medications. And so Miracle Medical will be providing the monitoring devices, the meters, to the district employees at no cost. And this is again to entice the members who have been diagnosed to continue to be compliant and test. We have seen in some other districts where co-pays, when they're run through the pharmacy benefit manager or even the health plan itself, are subject to deductible for some of these items. And sometimes that's a hindrance and they choose not to be compliant or test. And so the employees are able to enjoy these benefits by using this program and not having any cost to the member themselves. Additional services are offered at no additional cost to the district's participants are alternate site testing, auto code, audio voice readouts, ARC, and GlucoCard. And again, this is stuff that's already been being offered through the program to the district. If you'll flip the page, you can get into the pricing. Since we only had one vendor, we weren't able to compare vendors against each other as far as the pricing. I can tell you by looking at these things, these are items that are typically not your high cost items. They're not gonna cause you to hit a stop loss violation or cost a significant amount of money. What actually, the reverse is what's more important. If they don't incur these costs, and we have diabetics that are not testing, that's where the real cost comes into play, because then you start seeing claims coming in on your medical for folks that are not participating or not compliant on their diabetic. And so if you go through here, it gives a description. I won't go through every single one of them, but you can see where it talks about the strips, The Lancets, the devices themselves, the pin-tip needles. If you look to the renewal column, and the percent of incline or decrease, there were some areas in the vital test strips, the Lancets, where they did reduce that price. And again, we're talking about, items that cost $32 or $33. They did come off of the Lancing devices 25%, minus 16 on the solution. There was a slight increase on the pin tip needles of 9.5%. And so these costs are in line with what we see in the marketplace when they're being sold by a durable medical equipment company. And again, this is what Miracle Medical is. They deal with DME. Again, they do not prescribe medications. And the big deal here is that the employees are able to get these at no cost, because the flip side to that is if there's a copay or deductible hindrance, the danger there is they may not choose to spend the money to test. I will tell you that they do, as Mrs. Del Rios mentioned, they do invoice the district monthly, so this goes outside of the plan. In the event that you all were wondering how much this costs annually in the area of supplies, it runs about $137,000 to $140,000 a year annually for these. So again, it's not a high cost item for your employees to enjoy a $0 benefit. And again, I keep harping on this because if we don't do that and there's a hindrance because of cost, the actual medical claim is going to be a lot more than $147,000 or $150,000. And so therefore, the committee did score the sole respondent. And so the recommendation is to renew the contract with Miracle Medical under the same terms, and with the zero cost to the employees. And I believe the contract was for 1 year with an offer to extend for a year, a second and third year. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Well,
Yeah, I do have one. On the preventive side, I know we have a program that's already within our system in terms of the preventive side of the house. What is that related in cost? Do we have additional costs? Is this an additional cost to that preventive program
Correct.
do we have?
So keep in mind, so that's a good point. So preventative, every employee of the district through the existing Blue Cross Blue Shield plan is allowed one routine annual exam every year. And the reason I say that is because the cost that you're looking for here, when I said $137,000 to $140,000, are for those employees and their dependents who have been diagnosed already that they're diabetic. The reason that preventative is so important is because these are the folks that we know about. I guarantee you there's a lot more out there that we don't know about, and it's for one or two reasons. They choose not to, because it is a choice. You can't force anybody once they find out that they're diabetic to order the strips and do the finger sticks and the testing of the sugar every day. Or we have folks that have not taken advantage of that routine annual exam. And so back to your original question, this is an additional cost. This is not stuff that the routine annual exam would cover. The routine annual exam, or your preventative, covers the actual exam and the blood work to determine whether or not someone is diabetic or pre-diabetic or in danger of becoming diabetic if they don't change their lifestyle. Once somebody is diagnosed as diabetic, you would incur these costs either through the health plan or via your pharmacy benefit manager. In this case, it's been carved out to a local vendor who's providing these services at a lower cost, but more importantly, is agreed not to, and I commend the district for doing this, not charging the employees a copay or subject to a deductible for these particular services. So I hope I answered your question, sir. The preventative benefit is built into your program. It's 100% for every employee to go visit their doctor and have the routine annual exam. But once they're diagnosed, these are costs that you would be incurring anyway, and you would prefer to pay these as opposed to them not. And like I said, there are some folks out there we don't know. So that's a different subject where we talk about getting more people to participate on that routine annual exam or the preventative program.
Okay, I'll ask a question, Mr. Del Rios, if that's okay. Ms. Del Rios, do we have, or Angie, if we have someone who has just been recently diagnosed, do we encourage them to come in and talk to someone in our risk management office and learn about this? Because otherwise you're gonna be going to OK Pharmacy or CVS and getting this stuff.
So when we originally were with Blue Cross, prior to last year, there was communication between the pharmacy and the diabetic management company as far as them sharing information as to who was on insulin,
Right.
so they could compare to who was getting services, so that if they were on insulin and they weren't getting services, there would be someone to reach out to them. Because of HIPAA, they won't release the actual names to us of who's on some kind of medication for diabetes.
Right.
We were trying to get that going with United Healthcare, they work a little differently, so we're hoping now with Express Scripts, we can get them again to start talking to each other, and then have somebody reaching out to those employees who are not getting the supplies, for whatever reason. Sometimes they, like I said, they just choose not to, so. But as far as us, we can't do it as, like, from our office. We're not supposed to know who's actually on those type of.
But if they come to you, then you can.
Oh, yeah, if they come to us and they, self-disclose, definitely, we walk them through, we help them out, but we just can't be the first point of contact.
Do we have any type of campaign that you guys launched since then? Since you're talking about several people out here. obviously.
Not for this year. When we enroll, we pass out the flyers to remind them, if you're on any kind of medication for diabetes, or if you have a dependent, or if throughout the year you get on medication, come back to us so we can help you with these supplies.
So this includes dependents as well, not just employee?
Anybody on the plan?
Any other questions?
Make the motion to approve. Second.
Motion made by Mr. De La Rivera, second by Dr. Valdez. Mr. Guerrero.
In favor.
Favor?
Favor.
I also vote in favor, motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, thank you very much. Now we're next on the consent agenda. Is there any discussion or clarification, board members? Again, I need a motion.
So move. Second.
Motion made by Mr. De La Rivera, second by Dr. Valdez. Mr. Guerrero.
Favor.
Mr. Perez.
Favor.
Against?
I also vote in favor, motion passes. Next, we have the board governance and discussion on first draft of board operating procedures. Mr. Superintendent, Dr. McMahon.
Thank you, Ms. Watts and board members. So we have with us our coach, our Lone Star Governance coach, Dr. McMahon, if you can help us discuss this item.
Good evening, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here in front of what I consider a bunch of movie stars after watching your awesome video that you put together. What a wonderful, wonderful representation of the work that this board has been doing over the last several years. And the document that we're working with tonight with this first reading is a cumulative effort of all of the work that you have been doing over the last few years. So when we had our, in October, we had our board workshops where we talked about policies and how can we streamline some of our policies to make sure that we are working very efficiently in what is considered governance best practices. And all of those align to the framework of the Lone Star Governance Framework, the vision, the accountability, the unity, the advocacy, all of those pieces kind of put together. So based upon the work that we did in October, I've created a very first rough draft of the things that we talked about and things that we will be using as we go through and actually work on putting this together. If you took your policy manual, as it is now off of Policy Online, and put it in a paper document, you would be talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages, especially for your local. So some of the decisions that you guys made and some of the things that you wanted to do in delegating duties to the superintendent, what can we as a board still control, and what are we gonna hold close to ourselves, and what are we gonna prioritize? What are we gonna focus on? Because there's a lot of things in policy to focus on, but we also had those conversations of what policies really align to our vision, what policies really align to our goals, and how are we gonna work with monitoring those. So has everybody had a chance to look through this very much shortened document. And so I kind of just want to walk you through the outline of it. The first piece of it really just recaptures your vision and mission. And if you look at the third section, it talks about student outcome goals for the superintendent. When we had our board discussion, we talked about that X to Y by Z. And remember that awesome conversation that you guys had about the why? You know, what is our future state? Where do we want to be? And looking at, you know, what has been our trend in the past for our goal? Do we want to stretch or do we want to leap? And what is the opportunity costs for those decisions? The school, the superintendent and the school district is still looking at, especially those House Bill 3 goals that you worked on that you're required to have a plan for, and working on those opportunity costs and bringing those back. And when we solidify that, all of those will go into this particular section. So those are still in process. Does anybody have any questions about that point right now? Awesome. The board constraints, we talked about those at our workshop. These are the constraints that you all presented. The superintendent will not allow an increase in the gap between English language learners and non-English language learners on STAR 3 EOC. The question I had was clarification. Is that for reading and math or reading or math? So that's something that we need to come back as a board and discuss and clarify exactly how you want that written. All campuses will be to be classified as a D or F in the Texas Accountability System, so no more than 3 consecutive years. That was something that you all developed and put into place this year. And then superintendent will not allow excessive staff-EO ratios through the district. A lot of these things are ones that you've already approved, and in the appendix, we will be putting the constraint progress measures that go into, that align to those. The theory of action is what you all worked on at the very beginning. This is my shining star for Donna ISD, because I think with your theory of action that you guys identified prior to hiring a superintendent and allowing that theory of action process in the hiring process really led you to a very, very good match of where the school district wants to go and the superintendent that you hired. So that's just a summary of the theory of action that you put into place. When we start looking at policies, a lot of this was just pulled from your legal policies about what are the roles of the board, what is the role of the superintendent, what is the role of the constraints for the board self-evaluation. You all have done one quarterly self-evaluation. I'd like to come back in January and do another one. Remember the process where I sent you information and you went back through the framework and you kind of scored where you thought you were and why? Guys, you got homework over the holidays. Sorry. Everybody else, y'all enjoy your time off. But board, I'm gonna give you a little bit of homework over the holiday, just to kind of, refresh and refocus, so that when we come back in January, we can reanalyze exactly where we are and report that information to TEA. We also talked about superintendent's evaluation. You all have already started that. I believe we're revisiting that early in the upcoming year. Is that correct? Okay. Board chair roles and responsibilities. Again, a lot of these are pulled straight out of your local policies. When we get to the section on advocacy and unity, this is really some of the things that I put in place as to what school board governance best practices are. The agenda for the deadline, just like you guys do, getting your information in advance, being able to ask your questions, being prepared, notice to board members, and then just going through all of those areas, and then ending up with an appendix for your goals, your constraint, and then updating the 3-year monitoring calendar. So this is a very raw, very basic outline. If there are areas that you think that we need to add a little bit more detail, we are very open to bringing that to the board, but I do caution you, we do not want to end up with a 100-page prescriptive policy manual. It's supposed to be very short, very concise, so your public can get the highlights of those things. And if you look On the page, I think it's the last page, it talks about those areas, the very last page, Appendix 4. That's the work of your legal notices regarding board policies, which policies are being kept by the board, and which ones delegated. You guys have any questions at this time, or any areas that you want me to say, hey, is this in here? Do we need to add this? You know, what about this? You know, that's what I'm here for.
On the accountability and structure and policies, you have there that the board shall rely on support of a Lone Star governance coach, the compliance, obviously, the education code and all that. What if we get new members next year? Are they gonna have to take this course?
Well, you must have just been reading my mind, because I know that you have an election in November, and so my recommendation is, as we go through and prepare, we start doing community advocacy meetings for people who are interested potential candidates before they even file, the filing deadline. You know, let's go out there, let's let them know what this board is about, how this board operates. This is what we do, additional training, and as you know, in Lone Star Governance, it says the ideal is that new board members are trained on Lone Star Governance prior to even being seated. So all of that is gonna be laying out in a plan for your next year. As well as another area that I want to address on is areas of staff development for you guys. You know, what are some areas, I know one of the things in here is, according to your policy, is Robert Rules of Order. Do we need an update, a refresher on Robert's Rules of Order? What other areas are some, so those are some questions that I'm gonna pose to you in January that can go into here. I really would like to, in January, start having those one-on-one phone conversations with board members, because it gives me really a good chance to ask questions, get some responses, and listen for consistencies or inconsistencies among the board members. So when we come back, we can use that as a coaching tool. So if you will indulge me after the holidays, because I've already given you homework during the holiday, but after the holidays, I'd like to schedule some one-on-one, and I promise you, I will be much more concise, and they will not last any longer than 45 minutes unless you choose for them to. Any other, that was an excellent question, thank you for bringing that up. Perfect. Anything else?
When will we be expecting to bring a final?
My goal, just depending on what your board meetings are for January, it would be nice to have a second reading and then a final. But, granted, Friday is Friday and everybody shuts down for 2 weeks. It might be towards the end of February, March. We can work through some things. The big thing is to get those X to Y by Z's and opportunity costs, because you guys have to identify your goals, your X to Y to Z, so they can do their goal progress measures and update that. Y'all are 90% there, it's just clarifying those House Bill 3. We want to get this done as soon as possible, so when you have those goals and those goal progress measures in place, it helps the finance office in their budget development process so they can prioritize the budget aligned to your goals.
Marcia,
Yes.
they just brought up the election, what if, and this is just a what if, there's a shift in, new board members come in, and all of a sudden there's a shift in the board, and they say, you know what, we're gonna throw Lone Star Governance out the window, and we wanna be self-governed again.
Then that person might still be sitting there. That's one of the reasons why we start. That's one of the reasons why we start very early going out to the community, because a lot of times when people run for the board, they run because they have something that they want to implement and that they want to do. And if you haven't been a board member, you don't really always understand what truly are the roles and the responsibilities of school board members. And a lot of times when we do these early meetings, and these early community focuses and start, even before people file. And a lot of times people come in and are like, well, that's a lot more work than what I thought it was going to be. And you don't get paid as a board member. And so people who thought that they wanted to run for the board don't. Or they do continue to run, but they continue with a much more focus. And the times that we've done those early discussions has really led to a seamless transition for new board members coming in. Because, Lone Star Governance is not a mandate by the state of Texas. It is a accumulation of what are the research-based best practices for a school board. And that's, once you start moving into that system, it's hard to move away from it. And now you have things, in your state legislature that you have in statute, that as a board, whether you do Lone Star Governance or not, you still have to have a student outcome goal on early childhood literacy. You have to have a student outcome goal on early childhood math. You have to have a student outcome goal on CCMR. It has to be posted. It has to be measured. It has to be monitored. All of those things that you guys have been doing already for the last 3 years. So you're way ahead of the game. Good question, though. Thank you.
Marcia, now tying this on the training perspective for future candidates, as he was talking to about just now, what is the time frame that you're looking at for us to have an invite for those potential candidates?
What is the filing deadline? Do you know? Top of your
9
head?
till August.
August? I would start May, June, July, maybe one a month here or multiple places. We can design a schedule for that, and we can either, I can help facilitate it, or what I would prefer is work with the board members and train board members and practice with the script and let you guys facilitate it. But we have a lot of options that we can do there, but definitely want to have a couple of opportunities prior to the filing deadline, and then setting up after the filing deadline, an invitation to attend a 2-day training. And so that way, if they get elected, they've already been trained in Lone Star Governance well before, and if they don't get elected, that training stands good for them for a year.
The reason I'm asking is if we're going through the process right now for the, as we're talking about doing the last details on the planning that we had in the workshop last time. I think that's an opportunity just for whoever wants to come over, just take a look at what the process is, how the sausage is done, so to speak. So they have an idea of what they're going to be seeing, maybe perhaps in the future. Because I know right now we're looking at changing potentially one of the items on there already from our last discussion we had.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay.
Plus, I also think that it's important, well, at least for me, that I'd like to see a correlation or a relationship. We started Lone Star Governance, did our scores go up or did they stay the same? Because to me, that's how I'm gonna base it on whether it was effective or not. Because
Are
it
you
is
talking
part-
about your student academic scores?
Yes, correct. I
Um,
wanna, in other words, is the
You want to see a year by year, we started this year, what was the
Correct.
growth?
Is the
And
trend
then,
going up?
because, what was the growth this last year, 11 or 9 points?
8 points. We went from
8 points?
77 to 80 at 5.
7 to 8 points?
But some of the initiative, we established the board goals, right, about a year and a half ago. Then we started also implementing a few things like we talked about a pre-K 3, pre-K 4, full day, a lot of CTE included. So in other words, we'll see a growth, but there are things that's going to take 2 to 3 years before you see the fruit of that investment with a new program. And we talked about it before, I think.
Yeah, if memory serves me correctly, we didn't finish the goals and approve the goals until October of the previous year, and that was before last year's scores that came in, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
And you still saw with like an 8% increase in scores, but we can definitely work out some kind, and I'll also add in there, Dr. Valdez, and send you the research from TEA about districts across the state participating in Lone Star Governance, and if they go to a training traditionally they see this much. If they implement a training, they see about this much. If they implement a training and utilize a coach, then that usually they see this much. So I'll make sure that I put that in there for you as well. That be helpful?
Yes, it would.
But I know you want to focus on Donna.
Yeah, and my focus is Donna,
Yes.
when we started it, did our scores go up, did our scores go down, did they stay the same? Because that's what it's about,
Yeah,
student academic outcomes.
Yeah,
Did
and-
our scores go up?
and remember, we talked about those 3 behaviors that board members can do to influence student outcomes. Is exactly what you're talking about. Did the board create student outcome goals? Yes, you did. Did the board create limitations, constraints for the superintendent, those non-negotiables? Yes, you did. Did the board consistently monitor their goals? Yes, you did. So because the board did what the research says, what kind of percentage, what happened? Did we actually see what the research says? Was there an increase or a decrease?
Correct, that's exactly what I want to see.
I just want to add is that because our district was accepted as part of the Lone Star Governance, DA Lone Star Governance exemplary cohort, all the expenses are being reimbursed. So let's say the coaching that's provided by Dr. McMahon, DA is reimbursing us the money for this year, and also we're accepted for an additional year. So DA will be reimbursing, those costs because we are selected as one of the Lone Star Governance exemplary cohorts. So just wanna
So
make sure everybody
basically,
knows.
we bought
That's a
into it,
very good thing.
yeah, we bought into it for 2 more years, right?
Well, if we want to continue, now, as a district, if we continue, the TA will reimburse us. If we go through that, we get reimbursed for the money.
Any other questions? So nice to see you guys again, in person. Thank you.
Have a blessed holiday, ma'am.
Thank you.
very much.
I'll send you your homework in an email.
Okay.
Happy holidays nonetheless.
I changed my email.
Okay, that was a discussion only. So next we have executive session is the time is 6:42. Executive session is authorized by the Texas Government Code Section 551.071, 551.072, 551.073, 551.074, 551.075, 551.076, 551.082, 551.083, and 551.084. We'll go into executive session. We're back in open session, take possible actions on matter discussed in executive session. A, discussion of possible action to approve superintendent's recommendation of personnel, approval of recommendation for professions, including hiring and termination recommendation.
Make the motion to approve.
Second,
Motion made by Mr. Del Rio, second by Dr. Valdez. Mr. Guerrero?
In favor.
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 In favor, motion passes. B, discussion of possible action to approve pending or complicated litigation settlement matters and/or matters for professional duty under state law requires private consultation with the school attorney, no action. I need,
So move.
second,
Favor.
motion made by Mr. Del Rio, second by Dr. Valdez.
Favor.
Favor.
I also vote in favor, motion passes, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.